In this lab, you explored the default network and determined that you cannot create VM instances without a VPC network. So you created a new auto-mode VPC network with subnets, routes, firewall rules, and 2 VM instances, and tested connectivity for those VM instances. Because auto-mode networks aren't recommended for production, you converted the auto-mode network to a custom mode network. Next, you created 2 more custom mode VPC networks with firewall rules and VM instances using the GCP console and the gcloud command line. Then, you tested the connectivity across VPC networks, which worked when you pinged external IP addresses, but not when you pinged internal IP addresses. VPC networks are by default isolated private networking domains. Therefore, no internal IP address communication is allowed between networks unless you set up mechanisms such as VPC peering or a VPN connection. You can stay for a lab walkthrough, but remember that GCP's user interface can change, so your environment might look slightly different. All right, so here I am in the GCP console, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to explore the default network. So if I, on the left-hand side, click on the navigation menu and scroll down to VPC network, we will see that this project has a default network. Every project has a default network. That is, unless you have an organizational policy that prevents this default network from being created. But essentially all the different projects that you use through Quick Labs will always have this. So in here we can see we have a different subnet in each of the different regions. All of these are private IP addresses. I can also go to the routes, and these are established automatically with the network, so we can see routes between the subnets as well as to the default route to the internet. And we can even look at the firewall rules. The default network comes with some preset firewall rules to allow ICMP traffic from anywhere, RDP traffic, as well as SSH, and then also all protocols and ports within the network. So this is the range of the network. So we also allow all traffic from within the network itself. So let's go ahead and let's actually delete these firewall rules. I can just check them all right here and delete them. And let's just assume that we want to get rid of everything that's been created for us and just create our own network instead. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these. I can look at the status up here. We can see that all 4 are being deleted. I'll update as each is being deleted. And once that is done, which is now, I can head to the network, select the default network, and we're also just going to delete that entire network. And once we delete this network, we should see that there should be no routes without a network because there's no use case for them. So let's just wait for the network to be deleted, and then we'll verify that. So we can again see the progress bar up here that's deleting. You can also hit refresh, and this should just take a couple seconds. You can see that as I'm refreshing, some of the subnets are disappearing. It's actually just deleting them all these subnets first, and then it's getting rid of the network as a whole, because the network is really nothing else than just a combination of subnets. So all these subnets have to be deleted. There we go, they're all gone now. And now it's just the network itself that is remaining. If I go to routes, we should see that all the routes are already gone, because without the subnets, there's really no need for the routes. And then if I go back to the network, we should see that any moment now the network itself also disappears. There we go. All right. So without a VPC network now, we shouldn't be able to create any VM instances, containers, or App Engine application. Let's actually verify that. I'm going to go to the navigation menu, go to Compute Engine, and let's just try to create an instance. I'm just going to click Create. I'm going to leave everything as its default. If I go actually under networking, we should see that it's going to complain here. If I click on networking, that actually doesn't have a local network available. But let's just click Create, see what happens. And it does indeed give us an error and point out the fact that this tab has an issue. So we clearly cannot create an instance because again, these instances live in networks, and without a network, can't create it. So let's hit cancel, and what we're going to do now is we're going to create our own Automode network. So I'm going to head back to VPC networks, and you can pin, by the way, the services. So I'm just going to pin VPC network and compute engine because we're going to be going back and forth between these. And then within VPC network, we're just now going to create our own network. I can give it a name, and I'm going to use the same name that I have in the lab instructions, which is my network. Now I have the option of creating a custom or an automatic. Let's start off by creating an automatic network. So that's going to preset all of the different subnets for us in all the different regions that are available. You can scroll through those and see those all in here. And they have a pre-set CIDR range. You can expand that CIDR range later. But again, as an auto network, you don't define the actual IP address range. There are also firewall rules that are available. What's interesting here is you see that there's a deny all ingress and an allow all egress firewall rule. So these are here by default, and they're actually implied. You can't even like uncheck them. So these are actually with all networks that you create, and you can see that this has the highest priority integer, which really means it's the lowest priority. So by default, all ingress traffic is denied and all egress traffic is allowed, unless we create other firewalls to say differently. So if I check all these boxes, we're now allowing ingress traffic for these IP ranges and these protocols and ports. So let's go ahead and click Create. And we're going to wait for that network to be created. And then we're going to look at the IP addresses for 2 of the different regions. And we're going to create instances in those regions and verify that it's taking those IP addresses. So here you can see the subnets already all populated here. I can monitor the progress also up here, but this is really done any second now. I'm actually going to start heading over to Compute Engine and to create our instances. So let's click Create. I'm going to give it a name, MyNet US VM. This is going to be in US Central 1, specifically the Zone C. I don't really need a big machine. We're just doing some testing here. So let me just create a micro that reduces the cost a little bit. And I'm going to now click Create. And then we're going to repeat, I can close this panel over here, the same workflow and create an instance in Europe. So I'm going to grab the name from the lab instructions for that. I'm going to select the Europe West 1 region, specifically the Zone 1C. Again, a micro machine, which is just a shared core, and click Create for that as well. We can see the US Central 1C machine is already up. We also see the IP, the internal IP address that has been provided. Again, there are some reserved IP addresses. The .0 is reserved as well as the .1. So in both of these ranges, the .2 is the first available address. Now we can verify that these are part of the right subnet. If I click on NIC0, I go to the network interface details, and here we can see it's part of this subnetwork. Now, the subnetwork in this case has the same name as the network because this is an auto network. And here we can see that it's part of this range. So 10.128.00/20. Let's verify that. And that is correct. We are in there with a .2. And let's verify that the other should be now a 10.132.00/20. So again, click on NIC0, go to the subnetwork, and we can see that's true. And you can also see here that the this address is reserved for the gateway. Right, so that way the .2 is really the first usable address within that range. So now these are on the same network, so let's verify some connectivity between those. I'm going to grab the internal IP address of MyNet UVM, just copy that, and then we're going to SSH to this other instance. So again, these instances are in 2 separate regions, but in the same network. So we should be able to ping these addresses now. So if I ping 3 times using the internal address, then we can see that this works. And this works because we have that allow internal firewall rule that we selected earlier. I can actually repeat the same by using the name of the instance. And you can see that it's taking that name. It actually has here the fully qualified domain name. And it's just using the IP address for that. So VPC networks have an internal DNS service that allows you to address instances by their DNS names instead of their internal IP addresses. And that's very useful because, well, this internal IP address could change, right? But the name is not going to change. So it's always good to be aware of that you can use the fully qualified domain name to ping those. All right, now we can try this whole thing the other way around. Let me exit this instance, grab the internal IP address of the instance in the US, and SSH to the instance in Europe. And we're also going to ping the internal IP address here. And we can see that works. We could even now try to ping the external IP address. So that's 34, in my case, 67, 18, 18. And that works as well. And the reason that I'm able to ping the external is because I have a firewall rule that allows ICMP externally. And I can verify those again if I click on the network interface details. Here I can see all of the firewall rules and the fact that what filters they have and what protocols and ports. All right, so this all works fine. And let's assume that this workflow has worked for us, but now we have decided that we want to convert the auto mode network that we have to a custom mode network. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to VPC networks, and we're going to click on my network. And then we're going to click on edit, and we're going to change the subnet creation mode from auto to custom and hit save. Okay. So now we can navigate back. We can see that this is in progress up here. The mode still says auto. We could have also flipped that here. And let's wait for that to be refreshed. And now we can see that this mode is now, this subnetwork is now a custom subnet. Okay, so let's say that this has worked so far, and now we realize that we need a couple more networks. And there's a network diagram in the lab that has 2 other networks, as well as some instances and everything. So let's go ahead and create those. So now we're going to go to create VPC network. We're going to create the management net network. And rather than starting with automatic and converting, we're just going to start with the custom net. For that, we have to define each of these subnets. The minimum information we need to provide is a name, the region. So let's select US Central 1, and then the IP address range. And then I can click done. And now I can add, if I wanted to, another subnet. But the other thing that's very interesting about this is I'm creating this right now through the GCP console, but you can also create networks as well as subnets from the command line using Cloud Shell. And if I click down here on command line, I'm actually provided with the commands to do that. The first one just creates the network itself. You don't have to use the project flag in here. So we could just say gcloud compute networks create the name of the network and the fact that the subnet is a custom mode. And similarly, then we create these subnets, which is network subnets create the name of the subnets, the subnet itself, the name of the network, the region, and the range. Okay, so again, that's the sort of minimal information. Let's just hit click close and create, and we'll create the other one from the command line. So it's creating that network. And in parallel, I can go now activate Cloud Shell by clicking up here in the right corner. Yes, I want to start using Cloud Shell. And I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And once this is up, we're going to use those commands that we just saw to create first a network. And this is going to be the private net, which is also of the mode custom. And once we have that, we're going to create 2 subnets within that network. So you can see, by the way, in the console that the other network was created. Private net is being created right now here. And once that is ready, we can add the 2 subnets to that. So there we go. There's a subnet. It's also telling us, hey, this is a new network. you don't have any firewall rules. Here's some commands if you want to create some firewall rules. We'll do that in a second. Let's just create the subnets in here. So first we're going to create one in the US. And then we're also going to create one in Europe. If you wanted to speed this up, you could actually launch another Cloud Shell session. Now that the network is up, you could create these subnets sort of in parallel. But we're just going to wait for this to complete, and then we'll paste that command in there. And you can monitor all of this in the console. If we click refresh, there we see it. It's also completed. It just returns, hey, I've done exactly what you told me. Let's create the other one. Whoops. I didn't copy the command correctly. There we go. This is now in Europe, specifically Europe West 1. Oops, the wrong button there. Refresh. We can see that's already being created there. So we can definitely display all of those in the GCP console. You can also, if you click the button over here in Cloud Shell, you can actually open this in a new window. It actually opens it in a new tab. That way you preserve your real estate. You can keep focusing on the console as well as focusing on Cloud Shell. So let me actually create some real estate by just clearing this and then paste the command to list all the networks, which is gcloud compute networks list. So we can see them, 3 networks, they're all custom. And we can dig deeper into this by also listing the subnetworks and using the sort by command to sort these by network. So now we'll see my network has a lot of subnets because it used to be in auto mode. And then for management net, we have 1 subnet, and for private net, we have 2 subnets. All right. So now we're going to go create some firewall rules. So let's click on firewall rules up here. You can see the ones that are already there. Click create firewall rule. We'll repeat the same process we did earlier. We'll first create this using the console, and then we'll repeat the firewalls for a different network using Cloud Shell. So let me give it a name. Let's make sure I select the right network that the firewall rule applies to. Let's just do all instances. And for the IP ranges, select all addresses. And I'm allowing, in this case, ICMP, SSH, and RDP. So let me define ICMP. And then 22 for SSH and 3389 for RDP. And now down here, I can click on command line. And we can see this is one long command. Again, you don't need to define the project flag. So it's gcloud compute, firewalls create. The name of the rule, the fact that it's an ingress, party, that is also actually default. We could leave that out. Importantly is the name of the network. Action allow is default too. And then the rules as well as the source ranges. So let's create that in the console. And we'll grab the command from the lab instructions to do the same for other network. So here you can see, we paste that in. And that should now create the other firewall rule for us. And we can monitor the firewall rules in here in the console as well as in Cloud Shell. So we'll run a command to list all the firewall rules in a second. So they're all created. If we list them, we can see them all here. And if I refresh this, we can also see them right here. All right, so now it's time to create some more instances and then explore the connectivity. So let's head back to Compute Engine. I'm going to create instances in these new networks I created. So let me click Create Instance. And I'm actually going to close Cloud Shell for now. Or let me just make it smaller. I'm going to provide a name and use Central1, C. Small machine is very fine. And now, importantly, I need to expand this option down here to select the right network. We have 3 options right now. And it has actually pre-selected that network. That's because from an order, it's listed up top. That is correct. So let's click Done. And there's, again, a command line way. There's a lot of information here that we don't need. You'll see that in a second when we run our command. Like the boot disk, we are selecting a lot of standard options. So let's just hit Create. And let's pull the command from the lab that creates the same in a different network. And that's gcloud compute instance create, the name of the instance, the zone, the machine type, the subnet. That is the bare minimum that we need to provide. So let's run that. You can see the other instance was already created. I can refresh this, see that the other instance is already coming up too. And then once Cloud Shell is updated, we can list all the instances. Let's do that here. We can sort them by zone, or we could sort them by network. So we can see in one zone here, we have an instance, and then in another zone, we have 3 instances. Now, keep in mind, these instances are in different networks, and we can display that if we go to columns and check network. You can see that these instances, with the exception of the MyNet, these are in the same VPC network. The others are in different. And that's going to now go into the connectivity that we're going to explore. We're going to try to, again, ping IP addresses, both external and internal, and see what works. So let me grab the management US VM external IP address, and we're going to SSH to the MyNet US VM. Now, they are in the same zone, but they're in different networks. So let's see if we can ping the external IP address, and then we'll try the internal. So external works. That's because we set up the firewall rules for that. But if I now, and I can also do the same for private net. I can plug that IP address in, which is 35.188.20.220, and that works as well. Okay, so you can ping those, even though they're in different networks. Now, from an internal perspective, I should only be able to ping MyNet EOVM, which we actually tried earlier already. So let me just hop on the other ones. I'm going to try 10.130.0.2. And we can see that that's not leading to anything. We should be getting 100% packet loss. And then we'll try the same from the other one. So 172.16.0.2. And we can see that that again isn't working either. Okay, so even though this instance is in the same zone as these other instances I'm trying to ping, the fact that they are in a different network does not allow me to ping on the internal IP unless we set up other mechanisms such as VPC peering or a VPN. And that's the end of the lab.